Good afternoon and very warm welcome to our Digital Agility with Data session. It is my great pleasure to introduce to you Dan Robertson, Chief Data and Analytics Officer from National Grid, and also very privileged to be a customer of ours at Matillion. This session is sponsored by Matillion, and we're really grateful for Dan making it. When I asked him to tell me something interesting about him, he said he cycled here this morning from Waterloo, and I'm now doubly happy that he made it here. So thanks for making that effort, Dan. Dan is a real-life CDO, and as you can imagine, that comes with a whole bunch of evolving challenges. Dan is going to talk to us about some of his experience in that role, and in particular, how he's been working on facilitating the data transformation and migration journey at National Grid. So without further ado, it gives my great pleasure to introduce to you Dan Robertson. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, Corné. Thank you, Matillion. Well, good afternoon, all of you. My name is Dan Robertson, and as Corné says, so I'm the Chief Data Officer at National Grid in a group position. You know what? I looked at the agenda. Okay, we've got double figures here, so I'm happy with that. But I did look at the agenda. There's football analytics on it this time. Yeah, that looks quite exciting, and maybe that's why there's not so many of you. That's what I'm going to tell myself. Okay, but equally, there's a data mesh session on. That's the current buzzword, isn't it? But then again, maybe that's full as well, and maybe that's why I've only got. That's what I'm going to tell myself. But anyway, hopefully I can make this useful for you guys. So I appreciate you turning up. I did put some thought into how I could make this useful for the audience. I assumed, Big Data London, this is going to be a data audience. You're all data practitioners of some sort. So rather than kind of fully boring you with probably another data strategy presentation, I wanted to try and give you some insights into my role at National Grid whilst there's a digital transformation ongoing as well. So I don't know if that resonates with any of you. Either there is a digital transformation, there's one being proposed, or there should be one. But certainly, I think there are different ways as a data leader you can play it, and I wanted to kind of talk through some of those. I poked my nose into the last guy on here. It had some really exciting slides on here. Now, I hate to tell you as well, whilst I was thinking about how to make this useful for you, the National Grid comms team were trying their hardest to make it as unuseful as possible via the slides. So they are pretty dull, so I wouldn't bother taking any pictures if I were you. Anyway, let's move on a little bit. There we go. So like I said, so I want to just give you some insights in terms of the digital transformation journey. Let me level set first. Some of you won't know who National Grid are. You've probably all heard of National Grid, but you might not know what we do. So I'll cover that a little bit. But one of the main things that I want to go into is around what does it mean to be a digital organization and what does that mean for Grid? Because that's the other setting point in terms of, as a data leader, how are you going to play into that? Okay, how to deal with that. So I want to set the scene with what is Grid, what is a digital organization, and then talk a little bit about the importance of data in there and trying to play that role. And for you as the data team, get yourself in there and making sure that it's going to be successful for your organization. So like I said, I was going to level set first of all in terms of Grid. A lot of you will have taken the name literally, and we do actually run the National Grid. But it's only one of our business units. It's quite a small one. They're called the Electricity System Operator, and they try and make sure they balance supply and demand. They're not the driver for price, by the way, which I know is a hot topic at the moment, but they try and balance that. But it's only one of our business units. I will make sure that I don't call them one of the smaller ones because they are pretty important. But from a commercial perspective, they are actually one of the smaller ones. We are a global company, if I can call us that, because we've got a presence in 2 continents, US and UK, and we're focused on gas and electricity, distribution and transmission. Okay, that's the boring bit, that's who Grid are. Again, maybe for those of you who don't know much about utility, maybe you're thinking of going into utility in terms of as a career. I think there's another bit that you need to know, and it's interesting in terms of positioning the organisation as well for data and innovation and what have you. We are a licence holder, a licensed monopoly in terms of running gas and electricity networks in the country. So what does that mean? That means that basically the government and the regulator quite rightly don't want gas pipes next to gas pipes, pylons next to pylons, competing to move it around the country, which is sensible. But of course, what comes with that is it moves and it removes that dynamic in other companies of competition. Okay, so we don't have that obvious competition of somebody else doing it in our space. So the regulator is supposed to replace that with things to drive us and make us do things. But that clearly doesn't always work because we're not one of the most innovative industries. So I therefore take that on as my role as the data evangelist in the organization. And luckily as well, we've got a really good Chief Digital and Information Officer who's driving the digital journey as well. So, okay, that's the scene setting. And actually, thankfully, because we've got a really good Chief Digital and Information Officer, she is going to the second half of this McKinsey statement, which I think is bang on. I mean, we've seen the banks, the incumbent banks, saw the open data and innovation as a bit of a threat, okay, and their lunch is being eaten by fintech. That actually is something that I think is, they're talking about open data and utility as well, that could easily come. So it's really important that we're driven and recognize the opportunity, which is what we do. So now let's talk about maybe some of the detail which kind of draws the interest. So digital transformation at grids, we're well underway here. Okay, it starts with an ambitious vision. It starts with the so what, why are we going to do this, okay? And I'm not going to drain these for you, that wasn't the intention, so if you want that, well, maybe we'll catch up later. But an organization needs to think about how can digital make a difference, okay? And we put it in 3 pillars: our customers, of course, our assets, because we're an asset management business, and helping their employees. And there is lots of exciting things that we can do across this, and we need to reimagine how we can run these processes and bring this to life. Now, here's the insight bit, okay? Don't know what's happened to other organizations, but certainly a couple that I've been in, the digital team have come along, and they've done all this, okay? We know best. Actually, it's difficult, human nature, it's difficult to get all the stakeholders in. We can just get down and write stuff down, okay? Now, my advice, and I would urge you, if you see this happening in your organization, you need to push your way in, okay? You've got to show the credibility and why you offer some value in this space, because I think it is totally wrong to assume that whoever the digital team are, they know more about AI use cases, analytics use cases than the data team. Okay, but it's getting that credibility, which is a key challenge there as well. I'll just give you an iota. So what was happening in grid, so this is a fairly interesting, a use case that we have. The pylons that I mentioned, the lines, foliage is an issue. So we've got a chainsaw gang. In fact, we've got lots of chainsaw gangs. So they go out and they cut the trees down. Now the digital team looked at this and thought, oh, here's an opportunity, because they just seem to kind of eat sandwiches and cut stuff down and eat sandwiches and cut stuff down and pick and choose where to go all the time, based on probably last year where they thought the trees were growing last year, they'll go there again. Oh, tree's fallen on this one, we better go there now. So the digital team's use case here was to introduce, of course, satellite imagery. Perfect, overlaying it with our assets. So then you can identify, no, it doesn't have to be in real time, but kind of trees don't grow that fast. But have a bit of a view as to what's going on, and they could kind of improve their scheduling. Oh, let's go over here now, because actually this, for whatever reason, maybe it's rained a bit more sun, the foliage is growing. My step in there was, well, okay, that's a nice use case, and that is an improvement, but shouldn't we be predicting? Okay, we can use that same data, and if you have in your ambition here to predict where we think the foliage is going to grow based on soil type, the foliage type, the weather, and so on, then you can predict where to go, and actually you can plan much further in advance. And of course, the nice thing about that is you can put prescription in there as well, because if you can add the real commercial value is, okay, we're predicting that's going to happen, and that's a lot of places, and we've only got so many chainsaw teams, then let's have a look at where the customer impact will be greatest. And then actually you've got that perfect use case, okay? Predicting it and prescribing where the money's going to spend best. So there's my first tip, is to don't assume that the digital team know best. If it's happening, make sure you're involved in the vision. You've got things to offer, okay? Get yourself in there. Your team will have expertise and be able to extend those use cases and improve your digital vision. The other thing I wanted to share was, and I'm sure not all organisations have this, but ours has made it quite clear what does it mean to be digital from an operating model perspective. What are we going to do? And it took a while for this to come out actually, and people were really clamouring for this. This isn't the exact terminology, that got crumpled a little bit by comms, but anyway, got this through. And essentially there are three key things that we're looking at. So, of course, it is the innovative technologies, the frontier technologies is what our CDIO calls it, and embracing those, okay? But clearly it's not just a technology thing. That is one of the key things driving this. There is in there I think we call this reimagining the business, reimagine processes based on kind of the technologies and what you could do differently with the customers, employees, and so on. And that's about having a much stronger customer-focused view and a product-orientated view as well. And then last but not least, of course, is agile delivery, creating an agile business. There's two things that I would recommend here if you've got something similar. The first is, of course, you need to step in and stressing that data is at the heart of all of this, okay? That's got to be the first stress, kind of not from your perspective and bigging yourself up, but from the organization's perspective. If I go to the agile bit, okay, if a digital transformation is looking to build digital product after digital product after digital product, it's going to hit kind of the sludge if its data isn't ready for that, or if it doesn't, it's going to create another silo and it's going to create operational kind of friction as well. So data is at the heart of that, and it's key to stress that, because that's one of the big things that you want to get in to make sure that you're part of this digital transformation and get essentially the data strategy hooked into this as well. The other bits I'd kind of suggest as well, the embracing new technologies. If your strategy, your data strategy, your reference architecture isn't already broader, then you need to make it broader. If it hasn't got streaming in it, if it hasn't got edge analytics in it, and so on, it needs to show up that that's how this extends, okay? We're not just the guys who build data warehouses and data lakes. We are the people who create the intelligence that then can be kind of across the whole of the organization, whether it be real time or not, and show that on an extensible reference architecture, okay? So that would be another thing that I would take away from this. Now the middle bit though comes back to down the road, the data mesh guy and the talk. I would urge you all to read up on data mesh. Because if there's one thing also we can take out of this is that there are some really good ideas coming out in terms of agility for your business, okay, which I think the data teams can pick up on as well. It's not easy, I will definitely tell you that. We certainly haven't cracked it, we're still at the thinking through it stage and strategizing, but changing the way that your operating model works for data, I think is key. Picking up on some of those product-based approaches. I'm not going to go through the data mesh thing now, but like I said, I really would urge you, if you haven't read up on it, have a look at it and think about how your organization could transition to something like that. Basically, bringing the owners of the data together with the code and building in smaller chunks. Sounds fairly easy that way, but of course there's interoperability and governance and all the stuff that the papers you read don't tell you about, but like everything else, that's something you need to figure out as you go along. The aim here is the agility. So there's a few things. So that's the transformation plans at Grid and how we see digital. Okay, so that's what I think you should get in on, get your head around the mindset of digital. Didn't have the graphics guys on this one, clearly. I wanted a slide which had data at the heart of everything, and I didn't really know how to either get past of internal comms or here a Gartner slide, particularly like a Gartner slide that talks about how if you go back 15 years, any change activity considered people, process, technology. Jesus, people, process, technology, and data right in the middle. I love that Gartner slide. There's an element of this in here as well. If you look at any of the use cases, the conversation to the digital streams and the transformation program's got to be, how are you going to get there? You're probably either going to be capturing new data or leveraging data, or both. Puts data at the heart of it, so you've got to make sure that your transformation program, whilst you're figuring out how to coach people to be agile, considers whether your data is mature enough. Okay, so that's the digital transformation and how to, ideally, some thoughts in terms of how to kind of make sure that the organization's thinking about it in the right way. Once you get in, of course, then you've got to set the expectations. Because if you've managed to convince them that your data does need sorting out, you then probably need to explain to them, actually that's going to be quite difficult. Of course, it depends where your organization is. So hopefully getting yourself in there, you need to be ready with some sort of explanation for them as to some of the challenges. Now, I'm sure most of the data practitioners in this room could extend this list. The list is long, but I'd be wary about that. I mean, you'll highlight all of these. So, and if I come back to you want to talk to them about digital agility. You're digital, you're talking about agility. If your data isn't agile, your digital agility's gone. So how do you get to data agility? Well, you need to get rid of these things, okay? Like I said, we could extend this list. We're turning now into a bit of a data strategy talk, but hey, I'm a CDO, that's what I do. But the thing is to recognize where your key challenges are and to home in on them. My guidance here is not to do what I've seen happen so many times in the past is to, you get in, okay, Mr. Data Guy, tell us how we're going to solve this, and turn up with a 200-page data strategy with 60 recommendations about what you need to do. I've seen so many of those in the bin. It scares the execs, it really does. Maybe fair enough, but they've only got limited time. Some of them will listen, but the majority probably won't. So you've got to simplify this and condense things, put it into simple terms that they can understand and recognize why, okay? And then get some momentum on it. Suggestion here is for digital agility, you want to focus on, if you've got in there, if you've augmented the use cases, you've explained how AI and what have you is going to help the organization, you then need to get that simple, okay, well, if we're going to have a work stream in this transformation, let's get data in here and let's hook onto it and let's get investment in our data. And I would suggest you do something like this. So you call out proliferation of data, silos, people ring fencing it, not wanting to let you use it because they don't know you, all that sort of stuff. You've got to get rid of that, okay? And they'll recognize that because if they're already trying to run digital proof of concepts, they will have bumped into those people and recognized those issues. Confusing jargon, great, we put data in a lake, okay, but it's still got the same model as the source system, and it's still got the definitions of the source system, and only that person who has tried to retire 6 times already, but we've stopped him, knows how it bloody works and how to explain it. So that's got to go. We've got to change that. And then the questionable data, again, I know I'm getting nods, so I'm a little bit preaching to the converted. The questionable data, again, for the speed and agility. If you get the data there and someone goes, oh yeah, I use that data too, but I need to change it first because it's all wrong, you then end up in X weeks, months of reconciliation. Agility gone. So, of course, the gist is here, you need to kind of move on from that and try and figure out a simple way to move on. And of course, this is simple stuff, and I'm sure probably a bit too basic for you guys, but I would focus on these 3 areas: democratizing data, making sure it's accessible and secure, kind of getting a program of a data catalog, if it's not already there, up and running. Get the business involved in that, come back to the data mesh bit, and link those people to the trustworthy bit. Those same data governance people in the right operating model to have the right reports to show the quality. Okay. Hopefully there's some stuff in there useful, some anecdotes you can take away, some insights. A little bit of a flavor of what we're doing at Grid. I was allowed to share this. It's pretty conceptual. Again, so I talked about the simple terms. This is a diagram that I'm using at National Grid. I've never used this diagram before. It's been coined as a bit of a bow tie diagram. The purpose of it is it's memorable, and it's, I call it marketecture. It's something I can use with the execs to kind of deal with the ongoing conversations, debates, and challenges. Okay, so this is perfect. So I would always advise you base your data strategy around something simple that you can come back to. Doesn't have to be this, and hopefully with these photos going on, I hope not to see this again. Come up with something better than this. But this works in my organization, so the capture, share, and utilize. It's a bit noddy, but again, a lot of execs, especially in the utility industry, don't get it. And it means that you can focus a conversation onto an area, something that's tangible. Of course, there's so much more to the operating model, but this is the tangible kind of port of call that you can come back to. Oh, you remember this diagram we talked about, I presented before? The challenge you're talking about, let's talk about here. And in fairness to Matillion, who sponsored me today, thank you. I've used this for the technology strategy discussions. Because, gosh, everybody's got an opinion on data, haven't they? Not just in the technology teams, but every bloody team. And it's so convoluted as well. You know, with one of our senior execs in the technology organization challenging me on, well, it's ridiculous. Why have you selected that technology? It's never going to stream the data. You're suggesting an archaic, architecture for us. Okay, let's get the diagram out. What are we talking about? So you're talking about streaming. What's the technology that I've selected that won't do it? Oh, it's that. I'm not going to reference it. That does this, okay? That's where you democratize the data. Now, you're streaming data, however, and I've known, Professor, it's not necessarily there to do streaming, but what is your use case? And all of a sudden, you can have those discussions around it, and I love that one as well, that particular discussion. You then come into, we were going to stream it without using any sort of repository. Okay, what sort of decision were you going to make on that stream? Well, I'm not sure about that. Go on, think it through. Any intelligence required in that decision? And you might actually need this bit now. So it gives you something to structure those sorts of discussions around. And also the how, the operating model. That's what I love. I'm sure you deal with this as well. Oh, no, we want to do this. What exactly? We don't want to follow your operating model of, I don't know, one team doing this, one doing that. We're going to do it. Okay, and again, I use this regularly to come in and discuss what. And it's perfect in the digital space because the digital people, when the data's not there, because you haven't got the data agility, will say, well, we need to do everything. I say, well, strategically, I get that. Tactically, I get that. Strategically, you don't really want to do that because you're going to build a silo. Okay, unless we can figure out a way for you to have the skills to get the data in and structure it, etc., and all the data management pieces. So I love that. The digital people, you tell them we're going to give you the tools, you can plug and play with the data when we've got it there because we're going to catalog it, you're going to trust it, it's all in one place. Then you can fill your boots. You can absolutely scale digital. So that's how I use a diagram like that in Grid to drive the digital transformation. Last, I think we've got a bit of time for questions. Might have finished a little bit early. Try and get the eye of the people at the back. I mentioned technology, a little bit about the people and process as well. Of course, all about getting the operating model right. But at the top of this, the key thing I'd come in here is if your organization is considering a digital transformation, don't fight it. I've seen that in the past. I've seen areas of the teams that I work with, I don't know, we can do this better. They shouldn't be doing AI. They shouldn't be doing the data bits. I would suggest you wrap your arm around it. You try and get in that tent, and collaboration is always the right way for this. You show them how you can help, how data is absolutely a part of this, and by the way, we've got some expertise here that can help, and you move it forward. Because clearly, digital transformation is going to give the advantage to businesses going forward. And that's what we're doing at Grid. So that was all I had. Ladies, I don't know sure if there are any questions. I might have finished a bit early, but then again, it's lunchtime. You might catch the end of the, yes. Well, someone's got a microphone, actually. I'm not sure. This lady was first.
Hi. Hello, Maria Oakley, St. James Swiss. Really interesting presentation. I was just curious.
Now, the rest of you might be able to hear you. I can't hear you.
Hello?
Thanks.
Okay. Yes, really interesting presentation. Thank you. I was curious, as a CDO, what do you see as the top 3 qualities for an effective CDO?
Oh. Top 3. I do think that the obvious answer is, commercial data technology, but that's too easy. I think the commercial bit though is key because that's often the overlooked one. So I will include that one, commercial. I'm going to assume some level of data and technology now because that is clearly helpful as well. But let's assume that. I would say being able to build stakeholder relationships, managing tricky stakeholders, and having political nous are key. It's always going to depend on the organisation, the stage of the organisation, the stage of maturity, etc. So I could have a different answer per organisation, but that is, I would say, that sticks with all of them. You've got to, like I said, everybody's got an opinion, everybody's got a view, and you need to be able to manage that and understand how the organisation works and who is influential and who isn't, and how to deal with them. Okay? Good question.
Hi there, my name is that's better. My name is Jefferson. Thanks so much for your presentation. Can I just ask you, you talked about adding to the use cases. You said, as the data team, you can add to what's been proposed by the digital transformation team. Can I ask you, is there maybe one or two killer app, or big benefits that you've seen coming out of data having a big impact on your business in terms of what the transformation is, either maybe relating to customers or assets, but a big impact you're having as a data team?
Geez, I wouldn't know where to start. I mean, the list is huge. It really is. If you could picture a utility that isn't particularly using data and AI, I'm not saying National Grid is in that space. We are, of course, using data and AI, but we could always use more. I think one of the key things that you've got to do for your customers and your employees is bring up a level of intelligence and the right channel that customers' employees want to deal in. And that is, the tablets, the devices, etc., and changing the way that both of them can interact. But of course, the data and AI bit is getting the intelligence, whether it be for the customers, the personal, behavioural related, what it is that they want in their hands, and from an employee perspective, making their jobs easier, augmenting their jobs, getting rid of the mundane, boring stuff, and augmenting the stuff that's tricky. So they are the key things around customers and employees, and it's pretty broad, I know, but the lists clearly are huge. From an asset perspective, there's actually imperatives on us to change the way that the grid works for kind of net zero, all the climate change stuff, the electrification of the UK. It has to work in a better way. It has to consider, because at the moment the country is run from big sources of energy, pumped in and kind of put and positioned where it's required. The amount of energy we're going to need going forward, that is the wrong model. It needs to be a hybrid model of that and us sharing in the middle, and of course the EV cars and all that sort of stuff, sharing what they've stored at the right times. That's the existential one, not just for the organisation but for the country to get right. So how can that be automated? The grids self-heal, self-route, etc. That is going to be data and AI led. It's a great question.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Great presentation. I want to build on from the question the young lady asked around CDO qualities. You described running into some data silos where people had kind of ring-fenced their data and refused to let anybody pass. How did you actually manage to overcome that sort of internal roadblock to your path to transformation?
It's a very good question. Could have done with that in advance. No, joking. Well, as a Chief Data Officer, that's the data culture side of it. I mean, there are a number of ways. Obviously, your specific example, you go and chat to the person, of course, blah, blah, blah. But you need to change the organisation. So there has to be a data literacy push. There has to be somebody driving, communication, education, just understanding and awareness of data and how it is so important for everybody. And it's not actually people's data, it is the organisation's data, and in some cases it's broader than the organisation's data. And for the organisation to work more effectively, which everybody wants, irrespective of your setup, that data needs to be working. So, the question should be reversed. It should be kind of privacy by design. And actually, if you're not allowed access to it, that should automatically happen. But actually, if you are allowed to have access to it, that should automatically happen. And it's a case of that's where you want to get to, the end game. And there are a lot of tricky things to get there. But of course, it's the understanding bit. Because in the meantime, you need to get people to open their doors, share the data, all that sort of stuff. And it has to be education, and it has to come from the top down. Good question. Well, thank you very much, everybody. We filled up the time. It's time for lunch. So brilliant. Thanks for listening.